right.
What's going on, big dog?
Man, trying to catch my breath after this last week.
What a go away.
Yeah, what a crazy time. Been all over the province, back and forth, down south to the big smoke in Tdot. Had a busy couple of weeks, a busy week. Down there for a conference. You were down at the same conference, actually.
Chiefs of Ontario, yeah.
Yeah, Chiefs of Ontario. So it was a medical conference, or a health conference, I should say. And we were down there. I was down there on behalf of a research project that we're doing with LEARNfirst, and we've been contracted to do some consulting for the systemic gap analysis. So it's an education thing. We're taking a look at just the systemic gap that exists in student achievement in Ontario, specifically in First Nation kids. And we're using some norm-referenced assessments to try and pinpoint where those differences are, so that we can then use that data to advocate for better funding to close that systemic gap, just like it says in the TRC and in UNDRIPA.
Yeah. So where did that assessment piece originate from? Like, before you became involved, like, what was, obviously there's a need to kind of analyze and bridge the gap. But so then how do you get to the point of we have an assessment that is applicable to roll out to these communities? How do you get to that point?
Well, so there's when you backtrack it and look at the declaration, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and that was a decade ago, right?
Yeah.
And then that became an act just last year. So now there's not only this acceptance that there is a difference, that there is a difference in treatment, and that difference has had a net deficit effect on First Nation people, and specifically First Nation kids. Now there has to be something put into legislation to say, okay, what's going to happen? And that's kind of where this systemic gap analysis project has come out of.
Yeah.
Right. So that being said, now that it's a part of legislation, then these pieces are being put forward to say, okay, we have to close the gap within a generation, right? Which is very much in line with the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action in terms of education. So Chiefs of Ontario, on behalf of all of these First Nations, has entered into a research project with Laurier. So Wilfrid Laurier is conducting the actual research component and then writing those comparative reports.
So as a parent of somebody with a First Nations child in the school system, what kind of like KPIs would I be interested in monitoring in my kid to make sure that they're up to snuff in their, not only their development, but just their educational journey, so that they're not getting lagged in that education system?
So it's an interesting question, just because of the fact that, well, there are some things that are easy to make sure, relatively easy, because the biggest predictor of success for in globally, right, for students in schools is attendance. So students who attend school regularly succeed. Okay, so that's the
that
bottom,
checks out. Yeah.
right. That's the bottom line. And in First Nation schools, and in impoverished communities, attendance is an indicator, right, or a symptom. Poor attendance is a symptom of the system.
Yeah.
Right. There just isn't as much emphasis on attending when food sovereignty is a big issue, or addictions is a bigger issue, or housing, or whatever the case may be, right, are bigger issues than getting to school on time. Okay. So, and if your child is regularly attending, especially in the elementary grades, then that's going to be a big one. But whatever those habits are at the end of grade 6, those will be the habits in grade 9. The difference being is that in the secondary panel, you don't have as many people hounding you to come, because you do have a right to fail. The system knows it, and you have to take some responsibility and be accountable, even if you are 14, right? The system starts to treat you with that, that amount of respect, and say, you got to make some of these decisions on your own, right? And start coming to class on your own volition, right? So, you do have to monitor that as a KPI, if you look at it from that point, as attendance, because there's an interesting stat, and it really affects students at the secondary level especially, is that there comes a cross in the graph of success or chances of success that's a direct correlation to attendance. So, and I used to have this argument all the time with parents, and they would be like, okay, that's an excused absence, and this is they were at this thing, and I had a dental, and I took my kids moose hunting and whatever. And I'm like, listen, I'm not marking kids present when they're absent, right? And the reason is that you have to understand that regardless of what the reason is, whether you might think it's completely, worthwhile to be away, right? Like a moose hunt, which I feel that way, and I took my kids out for moose hunting every year, right? Those are 5 days that count toward that magic number. And the magic number per semester is 15. So if they miss 15 days of school, right, in any 100-day block, right, their chances of being successful are now lower than they are of being unsuccessful. So now now it becomes dicey, right? And that applies to sports. It applies to everything. It's a straight stat. It's attendance, right? So now it doesn't mean that kids that are missing for lots of sports aren't going to be successful. It means when we're talking about metadata and looking at research of research, right? Kids that are away that many times, right? When you're looking at hundreds of thousands of kids, the chances of them being unsuccessful start going through the roof after day 15. Okay? So that's important as a parent, right? Because when I'm asking what those KPIs are and those milestones, that's one of them. I need to be mindful of that, so that if I do take my kids out moose hunting for 5 days, I know that and they know that they have to have all of that work before they go, right? And the teachers need enough time to prepare the exercises, right? And not give it on a Friday because they're leaving on Saturday morning. It's like, listen, my kid is going to be away next week, right? I give you 5 days heads up. Give me all their assignments, because they're going to be doing work when they're gone. Just like we say, when our kids are, elite athletes, lots of times those kids are super successful, right? They're student ambassadors. They're model students as well as model athletes. And, for a lot of the times that doesn't apply to them, because you've got parents that are taking, an active role in that. So that's the biggest one, right? And kids that are poor attenders at the elementary system, that's not a kid issue. It's a parent issue. It's when we don't answer that key question, right, that every education system has to ask of itself, is, are we clear in how the community privileges education, right? So it has to be a mindset that attendance is important, right? Because we have had, very low income families that are putting in the time, and they're trying to make ends meet, and through no fault of their own, and they make sure their kids attend, right? And every time I see it, right, they get access to food security, they get access to counseling, they get access to healthy diet, they get access to tutorials, they get access to extra help, and so just by the nature of coming to school every day, right? So because there are supports in place for that if they come. But if they don't, it's an easy out. It's an easy out for the education system to just say, oh, well, they don't come, right? So how are we going to help them when they don't come? right? So, you're kind of, we're letting the system off the hook as well from a community standpoint if we don't send our kids to school, right? Especially in the early years. And that's really the next big thing in terms of a KPI that I'm a huge advocate for is this notion of literacy and numeracy, right? So this is in my mind the biggest thing that we need to get a hold of in our system if we're going to close that gap. And I get it. I'm all for land-based learning, and I think it's fantastic that we can do cross-curricular education in terms of land-based learning, especially in the area of social sciences, right? Like history and geography and language, right? Because out on the land, we can immerse kids in Anishinaabemowin, in Ojibwe language. We can do that in that scenario. But if there is, and it's important for identity, and I get it. We've built those programs, right? Where I busted my ass doing 2 jobs to try and save enough money through the school system, through identifying leakage, where we were able to fund for 5 years the development of an Anishinaabemowin revival plant. I get it, right? But if there's one thing that's going to be an indicator of our kids' success when they get to secondary school, it's going to be literacy.
Can they read?
Can they read? Right? I mean, it is a fact. And if people want to argue it, go ahead. Go ahead, do it all you want. But when that system is the system that we're dealing with, which educates kids based on a curriculum that is in English, that is read to learn, right? Because that's the way our system is developed, and most systems globally are, is that after grade 4, the curriculum changes. It changes from learn to read, right? Where we're just trying to catch everybody up, and we're worried about phonics, and we're worried about fluency, and we're worried about rhythm, and we're worried about consonant, vowel, consonant, all those things. And don't worry, you'll catch up. Just keep doing, just keep swimming. Grade 4, you better be able to read to learn. And if you don't, they're going to leave your ass behind. The curriculum does.
Yeah, and then you turn into the kid that has low self-esteem because you're feeling like you're the dumb one. You can't read.
So the thing is that, and I have this conversation, or I used to, right, with parents in terms of, special education and identifying kids and labeling kids. And it's like, listen, if you don't think your kid has already labeled themselves knowing that they can't read in the classroom, you're fooling yourself, because they know it and everyone in the class knows it.
Yeah.
Why? Because they're subjected to it every single day. When you're at work, doing about your business, washing, dishes or clothes or cutting the lawn or whatever you do at work, filing shit, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Your kid is at school, and if they can't read, they're in it every day for 300 minutes. And it just gets reinforced.
In a jungle.
And you know what I mean?
Yeah. Social jungle.
A social jungle. And kids are ruthless when it comes to that, right? Whether it's covert or overt. And so that my thing is that we're foolish if we think as a parent that we want to protect our kid, right? In that way. And by saying we're not going to say they can't do that because it hurts their feelings. They already freaking know that. And they're feeling it every day, right? The better thing to do, and this is again that 4th key question that every system needs to ask of itself: are we clear in how we privilege education here, right? Is how do I become an empowered parent, right? So when my kid, and we talked about this before, when my kid comes to me and says, "Fuck Dad, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot." And no, you're not, and you're smart, and you're handsome.
Just lying to them, or at least what the kid probably thinks is
that's exactly it. We think that, but the kid is just, we did not acknowledge their feelings, right? And they're just then they push away, right? And they're
Yeah.
like, that doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
That's not true. It's not my truth,
Yeah.
right? I'm sharing my truth with you and telling you that I'm dumb.
And you're not
right?
validating it.
And you're not validating it. And then screw it. I'm not going to tell you that anymore. I'm just going to be a badass, right? And we see it. I've seen it for 20 years in schools, right? But what's better is that if we start to take a look at how they get to that point as a 10-year-old. And the way that happens is through our conversations with our health center, right? We have to burn the candle at both ends, not only in prenatal health, but in sex education and in through curriculums that, in the teenage years, but also with young moms, right? And I say young moms because, as much as I'm trying to be libertarian here and be equal rights, young moms are the ones that do all the work. Mm-hmm. That's just, you just do the math, right? And especially in low income families, that's how it works. They're the primary caregiver. And if they're a single parent, then they're not only the primary caregiver, but they're also the breadwinner, right? So it is with our support needs to be given, right, and emphasized there. Prenatal health, postnatal health, and all of those milestones that you asked about as those kids get to 5 years old. Well, really 4 is when they go into junior kindergarten. Because there's a shitload of things that they need to be able to do as they hit 1 year, year and a half, 2 years, 2.5, 3 years, as they get ready to come into the classroom, right? Because we get them when they're 4 years old, and some of them are less than 4. They're 3 and a bit if they're a late baby, right? And if they're a September through till December baby, they start school when they're 3 years 8 months, right? And they turn, or 3 years 9 months, and they turn 4 in October, like I would have, right, as an October baby. So, as a parent, you want to know what that's about, right? And because there are all of these other pieces that have to fall into place in phase 1, 2, and 3, grade 1, 2, and 3 of that reading mountain, right? Of that literacy mountain when it comes to how do we put words together, right? How do we assign meaning? How does intonation, how does fluency, how does the patterning piece take hold, right? And that has to happen at a certain rate. And when it does, right, and it happens on time so that at the end of grade 3, they're reading at grade 3, 90% of those kids, or 89.1% of those kids, go on to graduate grade 12 on time. So if you want to affect graduation rates, what do you got to do? You got to deal with your 0 to 10 years old, right? And you have to make a bulletproof program, which means our teacher education programs need to be revamped because no one teaches you how to teach reading at Teachers College. They do it for 2 weeks. I'm a math science teacher who loves teaching phys ed, right? That was what I did. So I taught the intermediate grades, and I didn't know what to do with kids that came to me in grade 7 and 8 that were reading at grade 1, right? I didn't know what to do. And yet the system expects you to be an expert. Why? Because you have a professional designation after your name. Says OCT after your name. You should be the expert. Isn't that what they taught you how to do? No, they didn't fucking teach me how to do that, right? They taught me phys ed lessons and they taught me science stuff, right? They taught me some pedagogy piece, but nothing about formal literacy instruction. And that has to happen as a professional development component of schools. Right? And we have to tell parents that it's happening so that me as a teacher can tell you as a dad that this is what we're looking for. This is what I'm talking about, right? And if you don't have the wherewithal to go out and buy books, the system needs to give those to you so that your program every day is a 15-minute program. Take these books in this great big frickin' backpack and read them until that kid can memorize them and state them back. And you start it when they're 0. We started reading to kids, our 2 daughters, when they were 0 years old. right? Because they were in the womb.
Yeah.
And they listened to my voice and they listened to Diane's voice all the way through. When Darcy was in 2.5, 3 years old, and if we missed a word in Dumbo, right? If we were reading this, 3 paragraphs per page book, the Disney book, and if we skipped over a word because I was falling asleep and just wanted to get this damn book done, she'd be like, "You forgot a word." Right? They can do
You're tracking it.
They're auditory, they're watching it, they're whatever, you're not getting it by them. And you know what? And that just breeds success, right? Because if you can do that as a parent, and you can intervene when you need to if it's not happening, and you understand the lingo that teacher is talking to you about when it's not happening, because the teacher's an expert, and they know that if they get you on board, right, that 15 minutes a day, if I can convince you to do that for 365 days a year, I'm buying an extra 2.5 months of school direct on literacy. So now that kid's not going to school for 10 months. They're going to school for 11 months, 12 months, right? Because I'm giving them an extra dose of school within that school year, right? And it changes lives, because then all of that anxiety, all of that builds up from grade 4 through to grade 9. Then you've got puberty and you've got everything else that comes with it, right? Going to high school and angst and social media and whatever, right? It becomes this, like you said, a jungle that is so unreadable for them that they just like, screw it, right? And not only that, bringing social media into it now, how do you decipher and determine what's real and what's not on social media? What's a fact and what's bullshit? What's AI, and how do I interpret all of that, right? And be able to make sense of it all. And that honestly does, like, it happens early. And can it happen later? Absolutely. Can you learn another language later? Absolutely. Should we be immersing a big chunk of their time in Anishinaabe when they're young? Absolutely. Because we're immersing them in English, so we should be immersing them in Anishinaabe as well, right? But we have to figure out what that time is going to be, right? Because we're being torn. We're being torn, good citizens, digital citizens, being good people, being fit, eating well, everything, that knowing who you are, your identity, being a good reader, being numerate, right? We have them for 9% of their time. 91% is spent elsewhere between 0 and 18. 9% at school. So when we're there, we have to keep them on track and on par, because we're only dealing with minutes of engagement, right? In a 100-minute block, we have a few minutes to keep their attention, and then they're checked out. So as a parent, what do I do? What are those milestones? Those are the things that we want to make sure that you understand, steps 0 through 20 on code-related skills or language-related skills, like on phonics, right? Of where they need to be on track. And there is this gray line of where they need to be and where they are. Sometimes they're over here, sometimes they're, on the scale. But that's okay. That's development piece. Some kids are born in January, some kids are born in December. You got, a year difference within one grade, right? So those milestones are going to float to some extent. But as a parent, you want to be able to be informed on that.
And it's so important, like, it's so wild to think of how important that foundation is to have for not just the development, but that then evolves into the health and well-being of your kid as they get older. In your teenage years, in your adolescent years, you start to influence with addiction, and how do you kind of suppress some of those feelings of I'm dumb or I'm not literate enough, and just the spiraling effects of how the simplicities of maybe skipping those reading sessions as a kid with your parents can turn into this effect of again, this addiction cycle later in life, or at least psychological demand of the system, and then how that affects the health system and the healthcare, which is where I'm a little bit more familiar coming from now, and seeing the effects of that adolescent period in life, and how our health systems are focusing more in the harm reduction piece now rather than as much as the prevention piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's how the government funding is always structured. It's always structured in prevention, right? In not prevention,
the Band-Aid.
in treatment,
Yeah.
right? Like just like in cancer, it's the money is to be made in the treating of cancer, not the preventing of it,
Yeah.
right? So, and the same thing is, it's very similar, right, in the school setting, where we're always reacting. We're not being proactive enough to deal with it. And that's at teachers college, that's in elementary systems, and dumping our resources into that primary division to really make sure that we've got that literacy numeracy piece down pat early. And we can say it can be bilingual. That's how we were when we were at Lakeview. It really was a bilingual program where we were dumping a ton of resources into Anishinaabe, and we were dumping a ton of resources into literacy, right? And now, when we're looking at that conference last week with systemic gap, right? So we've done a comparative analysis of kids on reserve, attending on reserve in First Nation schools, off reserve in provincial schools, and then First Nation kids in provincial schools, that have a tuition agreement. Yeah. So we're looking at the data, achievement data of those kids, right, and seeing if there are any discrepancies. And to do that, we have to use a norm reference test, and we use the CAT4 because it's one that's accepted across Canada. I'm not going to get into, it's a standardized test, and of course, every standardized test is biased to some extent, right? But whether we're using a standards-based test like the EQAO assessment in 3, 6, 9, and 10, right, which is literacy numeracy. 9, it's numeracy, and 10, it's literacy, but in grades 3 and 6, it's both, right? Those are being done in Ontario so that those kids are going to be competing against those kids, right? And it is a graduation requirement to pass the grade 10 literacy test, which is an EQAO test. So it's a snapshot that develops a trend over time, right? And there's a use for that. As long as it doesn't stress kids out, and it's just this, and you answer it, you do your best, and we move on. And as the experts in the field, we track those data trends. Okay, that's different. If you take a literacy program, for example, like the ones we work with the Learning Bar, right, the Confident Learners, it allows you to analyze where kids are on the regular and provide intervention on the regular. So if you do the EQAO, in grade 3, we don't get those results back until well after those kids start grade 4, right? And very rarely do we go back into those pieces and mine them and say, oh, you know what? Billy messed up question 8, and so did Susie and Jill. And maybe it was an issue with how we taught, blah, blah, blah. Rarely do we do that, right? But with something like a literacy program, right, that's worth its weight, the teacher will know where they are because they're consistently assessing, and they can let parents know, listen, this week, this is what we're doing, and we're having a little bit of a struggle here, and we're going to work on these types of things. Here's a couple of things you can do at home. Can you imagine how much that empowers you as a parent when your kid says, I'm dumb, I can't read? Like, you know what? It's too bad you feel that way. It hurts me. But we're going to change that, right? This is how we're going to do it. Dad's going to save the day. Right? That's how, you have the tools. You have the tools to do it, right? So what we're doing now or we were there at the conference, the next phase of that research. So we've got the data, we've written the reports, we've looked at the discrepancies between rates of like suspension and credit achievement and those types of things, which could have qualitative influence on them for sure, right? And incident rates of why do First Nation kids get suspended more than non-First Nations, and all of those types of things, to kind of poke holes into policy and stuff. But ultimately, we're going to take a look at this achievement, which we have those results in now, and we're generating those reports. And then the next phase, which is why we were at the same conference, was because we're doing this middle years developmental index, which is basically a survey for grades 4 and 7 on well-being measures. Your experiences at school, how do you spend your time after school, right? Physical health, right? All of those questions, which is, it's a self-report that they can do online, and it's not an individual assessment, it's a population assessment. So we're not looking to for that type of intervention or assessment of an individual well-being. It's a population well-being survey. So we'll start to take a look at those pieces that you were alluding to in terms of angst, in terms of not belonging, in terms of identity, in terms of how I'm feeling, in terms of all of the precursors to maybe going down that road of addiction, right, later on. So we're trying to take an analytical look at how kids in those schools are saying they feel.
And that's a presentation essentially that you were given at the coup. So
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm a leader of my community and especially of my school, like how do I get involved with your program and like trying to onboard that kind of process within my community?
So, I mean, we have a ton of ways to reach us. I mean, if the easiest way is to go to the coup portal, that's chiefsontario.org, where they have the systemic gap project identified there, and then there's contact information in there. I mean, obviously, if you really wanted to take a look at it, and you wanted to hear it from me, you can email me. I'd learn first. Contact me through the show or social media, Fuel the Fire. Like, I'm fairly easy to contact in that regard. But we're trying to get health centers to see and health directors, which is why we were there, trying to get you guys to advocate for this when it comes across the principal or education director's desk, to say, hey, this would actually be valuable data for us to maybe break down some of those silos in our health department. And if you've got a need, maybe we can share some resource funding where we can have someone go over and do this, right? Type of thing when it comes to wellness. Because you guys have like healthy babies, healthy children. You've got, diabetes clinics. You got all kinds of things that we can use.
Even family well-being.
Family well-being, healthy families. There's just a ton of resources available that we need to cross-share if we're going to, really close that achievement gap within one generation. And so that's kind of what we were down there flogging.
It was a really good conference too, by the way. Like, there's representation. I think there was almost 850 participants at that conference, and like a lot of good representation from Manitoulin, especially. We were really surprised. And Chiging was almost like the showcase participation in terms of like just the energy and the characters that were involved in that conference. Like, you had Grand Chief Glenn Hare Hopsing, always the face of these kinds of conferences. And then you had Pierre Dubosky. He was like the junior representation for the Chiefs of Ontario, co-emceeing, which was really cool to see, because I haven't seen Pierre in years, and just seeing the enthusiasm and like just this enigma that he was on stage was really, really cool to see, because I remember him being a shy little boy in school as his reading buddy back in the day. So that was really cool to see. And then you had Michaela Patterson and Jordan Entz and Belisa Pelche keynote speaking on the one day about the success of their outreach program in Chiging, and doing a really good job. And I told Jordan this afterwards of how impressed and happy I was to see him speak up there for so long, because I know Jordan, and I know you know Jordan, and kind of his story as well. And for him to be able to go up there and speak in front of 800 people as well as he did, have applause breaks, have laugh breaks, and still command the room was nothing short of impressive. So seeing that alone was a highlight of my experience at the coup. Then you had Floyd Entz there too, like the health director of Chiging. He was challenging some of the political leaders when they had a discussion panel of like, what kind of promises can your party make when it comes to the betterment of our community's health system? And he's asking some good questions. So I mean, he was challenging people. You were there representing on behalf of COO for the education. I was lucky enough to get up for a workshop piece and presenting some of our findings that we had at the big panel there. That was a lot of fun. And I know I'm missing a handful of other people, but again, Chiging was just like really in the house at that coup.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Julia Candlish. She was a big part of the Chiefs of Ontario in the education sector, and she's retiring this week, I think. She's handing off the reins to Mick, who you met because we went out to the Raptors game.
Oh yeah,
on Wednesday.
That was a blast.
That's always fun.
Shout out to Ryan.
Yeah, big shoot. Rye set us up with some tickets, and I took out the big wigs from Chiging and Koo, and we did it up. Even though the Raptors got spanked, we had a ton of fun.
Yeah, we absolutely did. And then a couple of days before that, we went to the Zach Bryan concert at the Scotiabank. So going to the Scotiabank twice in 1 week is like unheard of.
You went twice that week. I didn't get to the concert, but
you also went twice that week.
I did go twice that week because Rye, it was Rye's birthday and he was down in Florida, and when he sent me the Raps tickets, he's like, "Oh, what are you doing Saturday?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm going home." He's like, "Well, you want these Oilers tickets too?" And I'm like, "Hell yeah." So I drove back on Thursday and picked up Diane and Aspen and Harmony and Naomi, and then we met Darcy down there on the Friday night, and we went to the Leafs game on Saturday, and we did it up again.
Yeah,
and they beat the Oilers like 6-3. Oh man, like from what I can remember, I had a really good time.
It was
We had Kevin and Cohen there.
The Shkakigans in the house.
Your brother was there. Derek and his buddy Chris, a couple of physios. It's just so much fun. Like I said that afterwards. I was like, that's such a good memory as a dad. I was high-fiving everyone.
Oh yeah, I saw your Instagram videos too. That was hilarious.
Making people mad. I was even at one point, I think I was trying to help the Oilers fans cheer, but that was just making them more and more mad. Just being a prick up there. But what am I gonna do? How often do you beat the best hockey player in the world?
I know.
Yeah.
And speaking of hockey, last week too, we got some pretty sad news in the hockey world for the passing of Chris Simon.
Yeah.
Garden River band member and
Wawa,
from
Wiki
Wawa
Roots.
ties, Wiki Roots. I know. Yeah, a lot of family ties on the island. Just an unfortunate passing to hear that last week at the age of 54.
Yeah, you know what? I got a chance to play in a memorial tournament with Chris, and I didn't know him very well, but we chatted a little bit there just because he knew I was from the island, and we had shot an episode with Eddie Lefrancois up in Dubreuilville, and they were actually friends up there, so he came and played in a memorial tournament at the Celebration of Life. And I remember because we're the same age, and he was on the other team, and we went into a corner there, and I'm trying to hold my own there in the corner, and he's just like a frickin' wall. Like he leaned into me, and I thought he was gonna break my ribs. Like it was just that the command of strength he has from that many years of scrapping and playing hockey, and I was just like. It was like you were trying to move a elephant. Like he was just so stable. I was just like, imagine getting punched by this guy. It would have just been.
I met him once in Sault Ste. Marie. I just remember how big his mitts were.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Just an unfortunate thing, and you gotta wonder. We were talking about it afterwards, and is that a? You look at the MMA and you look at the traumatic head injuries,
the
CTE, and is that it's such a symptom, that depression and all of the shit that comes along with multiple concussions, right? You got to wonder how closely it's all tied together, which is super unfortunate. But man, I loved watching him play for sure. I think everybody did. He was always exciting. That long hair and just willing to throw mitts with anybody. Yeah. Did Manitoulin proud. Yeah, Beaumont P, Chris. Yeah, and condolences for sure to the family. But yeah, just a tough one for the hockey community at large. The weather, as you can hear, is blowing like crazy outside. We have 0 ice on the lake. I've never ever seen this in my 50 years. This is the least amount of snow, and I'm concerned, right? I'm concerned with the water level, but I'm more concerned with the possibility of how dry it might be this spring. Because remember last year when we went up to Constance Lake, up to Hearst, right, and we hunted with Rick and Larry, how dry it was when we were walking through the bush looking for bears.
Oh yeah.
And you could tell where we needed to be.
The crunch of the moss.
Crunch of everything. There was water here before. And it's just tinder dry.
Like you could tell it was a bog maybe a year before.
Yeah. And if that part makes me really nervous. I'm not,
Well, we were driving up there last year. We were watching the forest fire at a distance from the highway, just kind of for miles and miles, just watching the smoke and even some of the flame.
And even when we were there that day, or a couple of those days when we were walking through, we were walking through smoke.
Yeah.
Right. And you can smell it. And
you hear the helicopters going by.
Yeah. So I'm somewhat concerned with that in terms of just, being nervous here on the island, because the island did burn at one point, and we would really need to take an active stance in trying to fight and combat something like that. It's a reality for sure that hopefully we don't have to face, and we get a shit ton of precipitation this spring.
Yeah. So when Snooze gives you the advisory on the fire safety board,
oh yeah, well,
you gotta abide by it. And I know there's a lot of rebellious people that don't like to listen to that kind of authority.
Yeah. Who's
to tell me to make a bonfire, have an open flame? But I mean,
yeah, it happens so fast, dude. It gets out of control so fast. We're pretty. It's actually less work for me when we have renters and I don't have to provide them with firewood. So it's actually easier on me to do that if they can't have fires. But we're pretty vigilant in that regard. Bud is as well. He's always driving around with his golf cart and hosing people down if they don't listen. So and good on him for doing that. But what it does mean is we'll be able to get out into the bush a little bit earlier and really take a look at what's happening out there. I leave my trail cameras out all winter, so I'm always excited to get back and pull
check
those
for
cards.
shed. Oh yeah,
and and this is shed hunting season. These are a couple of sheds here that are just phenomenal pieces. This was from out in Takima. This is a shed from Dave Millett's farm on a deer we call Ernie, and just a phenomenal buck. And this is him in his 6.5 year. No, this is his 6.5 year. This we think is his 7.5 year. And then I harvested him in that same food plot when he was 8.5 years old. Just a monster buck. A big old Manitoulin monarch there. And we can get out there and start those food plots, and at the very least put down minerals, right? Like put down a supplement. We use Antler Obsession, with Brody Teal out west. They've got a show on Wild TV called Antler Obsession, and they make a trophy mineral mix like that stuff there, and we make sure we get that stuff out into the ground as early as possible, because it's not only good for antler growth and it's packed with all of the minerals that bucks need to grow big antlers, like magnesium, potassium, calcium, and phosphorus, right? But it's also great for gestation, right, for milk production, for lactation in does. So it's not just big bucks produce, big fawns. Does have to be healthy as well, even more importantly, right?
Yeah.
And have good milk production. And so a product like that Antler Obsession works well for us, and we don't have any reason to really switch it up when it works so well.
Yeah. And speaking of which, we got the new episode on YouTube this week.
Yeah, so it's a season 5, and we're trying to get caught up. So we're going to promo that a little bit. Yeah. And I actually shoot this deer that we call Sticks. We end up shooting him on camera back in one of our food plots. Like, he's a direct product of a food plot. The
success of that kind of mineral laying and the effort you put on from April, May, June, July, August, into October, November.
Yeah, and I ended up shooting him right at the very end of rifle season, I think, in that episode. A real healthy 2.5-year-old deer. We always have that argument of Manitoulin bucks are sometimes a little bit smaller depending on where you are. They can grow real big. But when we look at an average deer and when we're trying to age these deer, we think that this is just a real healthy 2.5-year-old buck. He's got a couple of stickers on him. That probably, if you do leave that deer for till he's 4.5, he's gonna be a giant. But I hadn't harvested a deer, and it was late in the season, and sometimes I trophy hunt when there's a trophy in front of me, and other times I hunt the deer that's right there.
Hey man, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right, absolutely. Yeah, so check that episode out. That is these guys are waking up.
Chimakwa.
Yeah, that's a bear we shot up in Hearst with Rick and Larry at their bear camp at Wesley Bow Guides.
The hibernators are coming out. I got a friend out in Lively there that had a great big 200+ pounder right on their front porch just this week.
Well, and people have to realize that a 200-pound bear, they are getting up early, and a 200-pound spring bear is a 300-pound fall bear, maybe even bigger, right? So that bear there was 300 pounds in the spring. So, come fall time, that sucker is pushing 400 pounds, and that's a monster bear. They're such an interesting creature in terms of their biology and the physiology.
Yeah, so what happens like when they're coming out of that hibernation? So in hibernation, their heart rate's going super, super low. Like, what is that experience like when you're a hibernating animal?
So when bears actually if they put on enough fat, right, through throughout the summer and fall, they have to be able to maintain all of their life functions without any excretion. Mm-hmm. And without any caloric intake, mm-hmm. right? So everything, their metabolism drops to like 2 beats a minute, right? Their heart rate, and what ends up happening, it's quite neat. It's neat when you're gutting a bear and you have a look at its kidneys
in the spring.
Right? Because they're just cubes. It's in the shape of a kidney, but it's all cubed
segmented up.
Yeah. And so, they actually, and that's a filtration thing, right? So that they're doing very little excretion when in there. They develop a butt plug, right? So that they're not crapping on themselves. And they don't need to, because they're just burning fat reserves, right? And then their kidneys change form so that their renal function changes altogether. And then once they come out of hibernation and the temperature warms up and their heart rate starts to increase, right, and they do wake up, their kidneys have to regrow, mm-hmm. right? Which is why, in terms of, the Anishinaabe culture, in terms of indigenous cultures, bears are very much a healing animal, right? Because of those types of things. Right, of their ability to regenerate like an organ, like a kidney, mm-hmm. right? Which is why when we harvest those bears, we we take all that bear grease and we give that to medicine people, and they make what they make out of it. And we're the lucky recipients of a jar or two when we need it. Amazing animals.
Super resilient. It's wild to go fathom the idea. Well, not only that you're surviving without any caloric intake for so long, but then you're coming out of that slumber and you're just going back to the ways of foraging and looking for the food. And especially now, there's nothing really out there to chomp on.
No.
So that's why they're coming a little closer to the municipalities and coming to people's front porches at this time of year. So again, just keep an eye out when you're doing your hikes. And I know it's awesome. Everybody wants to go into the bush and forage and harvest. Just keep an eye. I don't think I'm not by no means saying be scared of them. I used to have a fair fear of bears before we started hunting up in Hearst. But having been surrounded by them in those kinds of environments and spending so much time in close proximity, that fear kind of really went away when you start to study that animal and start to examine what kind of tendencies they have and look for those cues in the body language. So, I mean, I'm not saying be afraid of them, just respect them and give them
mindful,
their space.
Absolutely.
Watch for cubs.
Know that they're out there looking for food. They probably got up earlier. So that's, one of the things that we have to be concerned. There's not a whole lot of food around for them. They'd be trying to eat a whole bunch of plants and pass that butt plug first to get their gut fired up. And, so they're going to be hungry. Absolutely. Yeah. Always something to think about for sure. And before we even get to bear season, we got turkey season coming up. I just talked to Danny. Yeah. Danny Bissonette from Longbeard right before the podcast. And he's like, just checking in, bud. Are you still on track? I'm like, hell yeah, man. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So, we'll be heading up to, or over, I guess, to Ottawa area and do a walleye / turkey week out there. I'm looking forward to that in just after the long weekend in May.
Nice. Scotty's still coming out?
Scotty's going to come out. We're going to try and get him his first bird. I think on day one, I think Christiane has to run a marathon or some crazy thing on the holiday.
Good for her.
Yeah, good for her. And then he's gonna come out on the Tuesday.
Jeez, she's delivered a baby 3 months ago.
Craziness.
Oh, moly.
Yeah, that's moms for you.
Yeah. So I mean, the schedule's starting to resume in that new spring harvest and what comes with that. Again, the harvestable foods in the forest are going to start poking their heads out, and I know the experts like Delphine, our friend Delphine Collier, will be really diving into the bush this time of year, I'm sure, and
I'm looking for mushrooms and all of the spruce figs or whatever the hell's is in season.
Yeah. So I mean, that's always an exciting educational piece too. Like when you talk about the land-based education, especially with your kids, man, I still remember growing up as a kid when my Uncle Scott would take me out, my Uncle Bruce and Kent, and we'd go walk the farmhouse and the farmland on the other side of Lake Minnemoya. And just those kinds of moments still resonate with me, and just the level of play and the level of education that you have just in those small little walks and the connectedness you have not only with the family that you're doing it with, but with the land too. So I still have a high reverence for that, and I hope to do a little bit of that with my nephew Sailor this spring.
Yeah, well, he'll be just a bundle of wonder, and that's the best time to take him out, because it spurs on all those other things. It spurs on conversation. It spurs on curiosity. It spurs on, just this connection to the land and ultimately to your food source. So, that's a definite bonus as well.
Yeah.
We got a busy week coming up. What's your rosebud thorn? I know you're going to one side of the province, and I'm to the country actually. And I'm going to the other. So what do you got coming up?
Yeah. So my big highlight coming up, me and my dad, Chuck E. Cheese, are going to Vegas next week. He's going for his AGM for Castle, and I'm kind of just tagging along. He took a little stumble last week. He
twisted his
knee and really got banged up mobility wise at the curling club, and that's no fault of the curling club. I think it's just more of a testament to the weird amount of snow and freezing we got one night, and
because he didn't fall on the rink. He fell going to his truck.
Yeah, it was on his way to his truck. So I mean, hard to really pick a fault at that. But I say all that just to say, even though his mobility was compromised, he was a little bit worried as to whether or not he was going to make it. But today I came home from work and he's just walking around the house like normal.
Perfect.
He was in a wheelchair like 6 days ago, and now he's walking. That resilient, tough bugger. I mean, so we're heading to Vegas for, I think, 6 days, which is a little intimidating, to be honest, especially with that guy. Just, again, enjoying what Vegas has to offer. I know Castle Building Supplies has a huge agenda going on for all of their employees, so I'm hoping Chucky really gets to enjoy and take that in, because I really love the idea of him kind of retiring soon. So I want him to kind of cherish these perks of the job while he can, while he's still mobile, and while he, again, has almost 40 years. If it's not 40, it's going to be close to 40 years under his belt at Castle.
Wow.
So I want him to take full advantage of that. So seeing that and experiencing that with my dad is going to be a special moment that I'm looking forward to. I'm going to enjoy every minute of it. So that definitely is my my bud coming up. My rose, again, just super grateful for the experience down in Toronto, Chiefs of Ontario, meeting up with you, the time we had with my team down there, great time. And then I can't even pick a thorn at all, man. I'm just in good spirits this week, and man, keep it coming.
Awesome. So for me, pretty much, very similar roles in terms of we just had a really good weekend, or a good week last week, down at the conference, but also we're finally picking away at some of these contractual obligations that have been kind of just bogging me down a little bit, so that I'm picking them off bit by bit. So that's great. They seem to be back on track. And then, we got to see the Raps and the Leafs. And this weekend we're going back down. The girls got tickets to Olivia Rodrigo, whoever that is. Yeah. So they're going down. Yeah. That concert, and Diane and I'll go out for dinner, and then we're going to Buffalo to watch Leaf game again.
Season ticket holder, this guy.
A new arena for me, down in Buffalo. Hopefully the Key Bank Center, I think it is, in Buffalo.
Follow them like the Grateful Dead this year.
Yeah. So we're gonna go check that out, and then a week after that, I'm headed north actually to do some contract work to Saskatchewan.
Going back to the old stomping grounds.
Old stomping grounds for 4 days, fly in, fly out. Yeah. Talk to some old chums down there and see what's going on, and reconnect. We got some big things on the way there. So,
if you see my buddy Keith and Sutherland over there,
well, I'll take a look for him. And you know what? Like you, I think I'm trying to think of a thorn, and I'm kind of done with this intermittent, like in between spring and winter. It's either one or the other. Let's get it on. Right? No ice. So we could technically still be fishing walleye on the lake right now. We should be.
Yeah.
It's still March.
Years we have been in the last week of March fishing.
Yeah. So it's just craziness. So let's get done with that. Let's get some hot weather and, get the leaves on the trees and enjoy some vitamin D.
Yeah.
Yeah. As always, we're going to be fueling our passion though, and fueling the fire.
We're getting outdoors.
We're getting outdoors.
Right on, buddy.